we look forward, over the next 45 or so minutes, we look forward to an engaging discussion touching on policy matters that are of real interest to us in the west of Ireland, and understanding the Sinn Féin position on some of those. As has just been said, this meeting is being recorded. We have got quite a batch of questions in advance, and we welcome more questions. So please, as you're listening and you have thoughts or questions, put them into the Q&A function, and I'll do my best to get through them after a while. So for now, I'm going to hand over for some opening remarks to President of Galway Chamber, JP Gilmartin. JP, over to you.
Kenny, thanks for your introduction. Díomh agus bhuachéad míle fáilte. Is mór an onóir dom a bheith leabhart libh an seo inniu. I'm delighted to welcome you all online today to our live Leader Series event with our guest speaker, Deputy Mary Lou McDonald, Leader of Sinn Féin. Before we hear from Deputy McDonald, I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate all of the retail businesses that have reopened over the past week. We know that many of you have faced unprecedented challenges over the last year, and there are still many issues to overcome, particularly with trying to attract back experienced staff to your businesses. To enable this, Galway Chamber is calling for the tapering of the pandemic unemployment benefit payment down to the level of unemployment benefit, and then to transition those funds into a scheme to support employers in their recruitment and sustainment efforts. With existing state supports in place until June, businesses must be given certainty on how long these supports will be available for beyond June, and what the revised qualification criteria will look like, enabling them to plan accordingly. It's undoubted that many sectors are going to require some degree of financial support for the remainder of 2021, and others indeed into mid-2022. Over the last few weeks, we've had some very positive news here in Galway, with the announcement of new jobs with Unitsa, a US-based IT company, and A-Line, a global security and compliance solutions provider. These high-value jobs are another vote of confidence for Galway and testament to the talent we have in this region. Earlier this month, we also welcomed the unveiling of the vision for the development of Galway Harbour. This will be a very significant boost to our city's cultural, sustainable, recreational and tourism offering all along the city's water edge. It's going to future-proof the Galway Docklands area as a vibrant urban neighbourhood and serve as an attractive destination for employment, investment and sustainable urban living. And now on to today's event. I'd like to thank most sincerely Deputy McDonald for accepting our invitation and speaking this afternoon. Given her role as Leader of the Opposition and President of Sinn Féin, it will be very interesting for the Galway business community to learn more about the party's policy agenda, and I would encourage you to use today's event as an opportunity to provide feedback. Prior to becoming Leader of Sinn Féin in 2018, Deputy McDonald was Deputy Leader of Sinn Féin, and following her election to the Dáil in 2011, Deputy McDonald was Sinn Féin spokesperson for public expenditure and reform. And on her re-election in 2016, Sinn Féin's All-Ireland spokesperson for mental health and suicide prevention. She was a prominent member of the Public Accounts Committee between 2011 and 2017, holding ministers and civil servants to account. She's also served on the joint Oireachtas committees for public expenditure and reform and the future of mental health. Deputy McDonald was an MEP for Dublin from 2004 to 2009, and during her time in the European Parliament, Mary Lou was a prominent member of the Employment and Social Affairs Committee and also the Civil Liberties Committee. At this stage, Deputy McDonald, it's for me, albeit virtually, to welcome you to Galway, and we look forward to hearing from you now. Thank you.
Well, Díomh Galéir agus gur míle maithagat JP agus is mór an óir dumsa than so livse inniu sa Gaillimh agus mis I mail ferrista inniu ach sin scéal eile. I'm so pleased to join all of you this afternoon for this conversation, and JP, thank you for those words of welcome. And I want to thank Kenny and others, the Chamber, for putting this event together. I think it's really important that we are talking to each other, listening to each other, particularly in these times as we emerge from what has been a chaotic episode in our lives. The last 14 months have been really tough, And now we are faced with the question, and some of them very profound questions, as to how we reshape and recover and how we build a modern Ireland. So I want to commend and congratulate everybody from the business community everywhere, but particularly in Galway today, for all of your efforts over the last number of months, and to wish the very, very best of good luck to everybody who is re-emerging from lockdown back into business, some form of business as usual, and who are lifting their shutters and who are welcoming clients, customers and staff back onto their premises. So Ganairi live Galair. I suppose I want to borrow the phrase, JP, if I can, from President Biden, who in turn borrowed the phrase building back better from the United Nations, because I think that's what we need to do. You have all been through a very tough year. The pandemic and the public health restrictions brought sectors of the economy to a standstill. And there is no doubt in my mind that the consequences of this are very serious and far-reaching, and that we will need to continue actively supporting business into recovery and beyond. We need to give companies a chance to trade out of this crisis, to maintain employment in what is a very difficult time for so many. And after what has been a seismic shock, not just economically, but also in our social fabric, now is the time that we need to assess and look to the future. We need to begin to rebuild our society and our economy in a way that is fair and in a way that is sustainable. I don't believe that we should simply look back to what we had prior to COVID. I think we can be much more ambitious than that. I think we should look for something better. And that's going to require ambition within the business community, but also within political life. It will require ambition, ideas, and belief. And it is also going to require courage and common purpose. We need to look at unleashing the massive potential of our regional towns and cities as part of building a truly national economy. For Ireland to progress and succeed, the development of our regions has to be at the centre of job creation, of economic development and enterprise strategy. And we have to make sure that Galway is a sustainable place in which to live, to work and to trade, a place where young people have an opportunity to stay and to build their future. Galway must be a place where enterprise can flourish and where prosperity and sustainability go hand in hand. And if Galway is to thrive, then regional development and connectivity have to be hardwired into this work. So not alone will this require a new spatial strategy to power infrastructural development in the West, but we will also need detailed Indigenous enterprise strategy that puts a very specific focus on SMEs, but also on micro businesses and supporting the next generation of both. Foreign direct investment is important. Let's not lose sight of that. There is volatility around that right now. So whilst holding onto our attractiveness as a location for FDI, we need to place a very special emphasis on expansion of Indigenous sustainable growth sectors. Obviously, pharmaceuticals in Galway should be strengthened by a focus on fostering Indigenous industry. And of course, innovation has to be at the heart of modernising our local economies too. I suppose, JP, one of the constants of life is change. And we see that now in the transition to remote working. We need to be aware of the need to innovate, and that being our response to change, how we harness innovation and how innovation is a driver of economic development. We need to support hubs that drive innovation locally, and to actively pursue that. We need incubators and acceleration programs as the central plank of how we recover and reshape our economy, particularly in growth for enterprises and young firms. And with the right vision, we have an opportunity to enable digital cottage industries to flourish in the West, and the development of a strategy supported by the IDA to enable people to remain living in the West while working elsewhere, including, by the way, overseas. To realise the economic potential of our regions and cities like Galway, then investment in key infrastructure is essential. And we want to see the Galway transport strategy progressed, including the ring road, because without constantly enhancing mobility, people can't get around and society and businesses get backed up. So the need for investment in infrastructure is frankly a no-brainer. In fact, the last time I was in Galway, it was raining, I have to say, but no matter that, it took me 45 minutes to get from one side of the city centre to the other, all because of traffic congestion. So it's clear that improving public transport and bus lanes must go hand in hand with other infrastructural developments. And if we are to build a regional balanced national economy, then connectivity from the centre to the regions is essential. And by the way, I'm talking about connectivity, not dominance. And we might come to that in some of our discussion, Kenny. So it's therefore disappointing that the high-speed rail between Galway and Dublin isn't on the agenda of the current government. I know that it's something my colleague Deputy Mairead Farrell is very keen to work with Chambers Galway and others on, because cutting the travel time between cities is essential if we are going to be really connected and if we're going to meet the needs and demands of modern enterprise. I'm very heartened that Galway Chambers is highlighting housing as one of your key concerns, because access to secure and affordable housing is good for society, but it also makes sound economic sense. And how could we ever hope to have a high value, high productivity economy if people are perpetually worried about keeping a roof over their heads? People being able to live comfortably in the city in which they work is, to my mind, extremely beneficial for business and for our communities. But the housing crisis in Galway will only be solved when the government intervenes to build houses that people can actually afford to rent or to buy. And this has to happen in inner city locations too. It's an essential component of transforming cities into places that are good to live in and good to do business in. JP, I believe that despite all of the challenges, that the future is bright for Galway and for Ireland. But I know that this is only so if the right decisions are made today. So we have to get people back to work. We have to get enterprise back firing on all cylinders. We need to come out of this crisis with an ambition to build a national economy, at the heart of which are our regional towns and cities. I should also say, JP, that I'm meeting Conor O'Dowd of the Galway Port Company this afternoon to go through the development plan for the port. And I know just how central and important this development is for the future of Galway as a focal point in your economic growth, and for what I think will be a really exciting regeneration of the city. I'm particularly enthused from what I know of the plan thus far by the public realm aspects of it. The idea of attracting people into the Docklands area will bring a huge benefit all round in it, and of course for business. And as a person who represents the Dublin Docklands in my own constituency, I know just how important it is to get developments like that right. And that when you get it right, as international experience will attest, the dividends are absolutely mighty. So I meet you, I suppose, on a day where we are emerging, albeit gradually, from what has been just a catastrophic emergency in so many people's lives. People have been sick, people have been bereaved, people have been isolated and under pressure. And we very often applaud correctly our frontline workers, and rightly so, particularly in health services. But can I also pay tribute to all of those in retail, those right across the supply chain who kept the lights on and who looked after all of the rest of us during a very difficult time, and those businesses and workers who could not open and who could not go to work and who have come through a very torrid time. Now is a moment for social solidarity, a moment for common purpose, and also a moment for ambition. And I think the idea of dialogues like this between politics and the chambers, but also between what are called the social partners and right across society, will be incredibly valuable in the time ahead. So, as with every conversation, we don't have to agree on everything. In fact, it would be odd if we did. The great virtue of dialogue is that we hear diversities of views, and I'm looking forward to that discussion today. And I hope that in the course of our conversation, we can hear ideas and set out stalls about doing that, building back better together. So, Gurmaya Guv Arish.
Very good, and thank you, Mary Lou, for those words. And I like the theme of Galway thriving, because if Galway's thriving, then that's an enabler to the region and the wider territory being thriving. And obviously, innovation-driven economic development is something that we're banging the drum on a daily basis. And there's a key word in all of this as well, and it'll be interesting as we go through the conversation to link and to move from announcement to delivery. And I think one of the key things is getting delivery in terms of infrastructure and how that's going to be really helpful as we move down the road. I think to begin, and the conversation, the questions that have come in are quite wide ranging, so I've tried to frame them. And I think one is actually looking at that ambition for the future. And part of that is looking at what supports and what funding is there. And we know that there's the EU Recovery and Resilience Plan, of which we in Ireland can access a significant chunk of money. Now, government have yet to publish or indeed submit their application as far as we're aware. If you were submitting it and indeed in the position of leading government, where would you start and what priorities would be put in the National Recovery Plan?
I think starting from today, if I were the Taoiseach today, the first job of work is to get businesses that have been asleep, to reawaken them and to get people back to work. So I think one of the first things that I would do is to reassure every sector of the economy, every small business owner, every worker, that for so long as there is a national public health emergency that forces you to close your doors, or that means that you cannot go to work, that the state will support you. And I know that there is a concern among some in business that perhaps the level of payments are acting as a disincentive in terms of people returning to work or getting people back to work. And we might chat that out. But the first thing that we have to recognize is that when you are in an emergency, you deploy emergency devices, and you don't leave hanging over either business or the working population the prospect of that getting pulled prematurely. I think that's a really, really important reassurance. On the wider scope of things, I think the building of infrastructure and connectivity has to be at the heart of developing a national economy. So listen, Kenny, we live on a small island. I mean, I listen to the political debate sometimes, and you'd imagine we were Australia or some vast territory. We are a very small landmass with a relatively small population base. And yet we have still managed to have such disjoint between our cities and our towns, and such lack of uniformity in terms of access to basic services. Dare I mention the B word of broadband? I'll say it out loud. If I hear again another announcement on rural broadband, I will go through the roof of the Dáil. So I think that's where, if you're looking and asking, how do you recover? How do you build back better? Well, then the answer is that you invest. And I am very conscious as a political leader that there might be, in fact, there will be an instinct among some, once the worst of the crisis passes, to say, well, now we need to trim our sails. Now we need to cut back. Now, I'm as realistic as the next person. I know you have to live within your means and money doesn't grow on trees. I know all of that. And I also know that austerity is not the answer to the crisis that we have been through. Investment is. So many of the issues that you're raising in Galway for the city, and as a regional hub around connectivity, around even basic infrastructure like bus lanes and the capacity to move around your city. Those are the issues across the regions that are writ large, and that's where the emphasis needs to be. That, and then of course innovation. We have to be light on our feet, and we have to, as I said in my opening remarks, I think really accept and embrace at every level that life is all about change. That's the nature of living a human life. It's the nature of societies and the economy. And you can do one of two things. You can push against that and cross your fingers and hope that you can hang on, or you can embrace change and figure out for a nimble economy like ours, how do we capitalize on that, on a country with really good demographics, you know, with good educational profile for the most part. How do we build on that, and how do we capture all of that? So for me, those are two pillars. And then the third pillar that I would have to mention is the pillar of equality and social justice. You know, really good, strong, thriving, sustainable economies have equality hardwired into kind of their DNA and into their very essence. So I think if we get those three pillars right, we won't be far off course, you know, for building a really national economy. And I'm speaking to you from Stormont today. I was up doing some meetings here in Belfast, and just to let you know, from the north into the west, there is a real sense now of the future amongst business leaders here, that the future for Ireland is about harnessing our capacities island-wide. And I think that's a really exciting opportunity that's wide open for us.
Absolutely. I like when you talk about being light on our feet and talking to innovation. So in terms of let's say the Recovery Resilience Fund, it will be investment into infrastructure. Back to your reform hat though, one of the feedbacks that we're getting when we engage and push on delivery is that regulations and the planning system and the processes are overly burdensome and are causing things to be slowed up. To what extent would you see the need for change and revision and an effort at trying to accelerate some of our regulatory environments that do seem to be a barrier for delivery?
Okay, so I think that's a story of two parts. On the one part, we have regulation and we have systems and processes for a reason. I mean, everything from protecting the public interest, the public good, health and safety, all of those things. And we as a society have to be sure that we always have our due diligence done, without a doubt. However, I would share much of the frustration that, God, we are so slow at doing things here that it seems to me in other jurisdictions get done much more quickly, and we have to interrogate why that is. And it strikes me that within our public administration, our public apparatus, we have massive capacity, massive talent, but I think at times we have lacked urgency and leadership. And listen, as a politician and a political leader, I believe that's on us. I'm not pointing the finger anywhere beyond the political system to actually create those pathways. So whether it's procurement or planning, to make sure that things are done correctly and efficiently. I don't think you have to make a choice, and sometimes it's almost like there's a binary choice in Irish public life. If you want to do something well, you have to do it slowly. I actually don't buy that. I think you can do something very thoroughly, but you can also do it efficiently. And look, that comes down to everything. I mean, you'll have heard the criticism, Kenny, as I do, you'd be talking about a stretch of road and that it might take 6 years to deliver. And you kind of say, I've never worked in construction. I don't think I would be a stellar construction worker, God knows. But cheapers, you'd say, Christ, I'll go out and build it myself if it's going to take 6 years. So we're very capable people, and we work hard, and we've good productivity, ratings. We're no slackers, So I think, and this is on us politicians, our public administration needs to get reformed and refashioned and directed and encouraged in a way to catch up with all of that. So I mean, one of the areas I mentioned, procurement there, certainly for the purposes of public housing and delivering big projects in not just social housing, but also affordable housing. I know my colleague Owen O'Brien has done a lot of work on the procurement process and how you finesse that. It's not to cut corners or to deliver things that are substandard, because you still have to be sure that you have done your due diligence. But God, we have to be able to deliver more quickly.
Yeah, no, agreed, and welcome those comments. We have colleagues from Sligo Chamber and indeed broader regional representation on this call. And one item that's that we're very anxious about, because it's an opportunity. It's as a result of our status as a region being downgraded by the European Commission and indeed the Parliament referring to the Northwest as being a lagging region. But one of the things that has come out of that is the increased participation of co-funding. And along with the Northwest Regional Assembly, a campaign was launched, Let's Be More with 60. And this whole notion that there's a significant opportunity to try and positively discriminate towards the Northwest and seize on additional opportunities from Europe to work with us. Now, momentum just doesn't seem to be building yet, though, on the delivery of that at government level. If you wouldn't mind just giving us your sense of, we talk about balanced regional development, but what does that mean, and where would you start if it was the case that you were leading government in the morning?
So Kenny, I'm old enough to remember when I think it was Charlie McCreevy ran on his decentralization mission and escapade. I don't know, you look more baby-faced than I'm not sure if you recall that particular tournament. So what it amounts to, and just bear with me, what it amounted to is this, that decentralization was about moving a couple of departments to a number of different counties and getting them out of Dublin. I mean, I don't have an issue per se with that, except to remark that doesn't represent actual decentralization or a thoughtful, planned regionalization of services and the economy and so on. So the first thing I'd say to you, Kenny, is, and this might be obvious, but I think we need to say it, if we are going to have successful regional development, we have to actually be serious about it. We have to mean it. It can't be just something that gets resurrected every election cycle. It can't be, a thing of, well, we'll move something off the East Coast just to calm them down in Mayo or Sligo or whatever the case may be. And I think for me, it is quite telling that, for instance, the Western Railway corridor and other instances that I know colleagues of mine, Matt Carthy, when he was an MEP not so long ago, things that my colleagues were pushing very energetically at a European level as well as domestically, and they weren't sensing any kind of urgency from the state. So what needs to happen is it needs to be made clear that regional development is a priority item, that regional development doesn't just benefit the regions, but actually benefits everyone who lives on the island. I'm a Dubliner. I live in what would be considered an outer city suburb. I live in Cabra. So we're not quite in the inner city, but we're a stone's throw away. And I think I can speak for all Dubliners when I say there's no advantage for us to have our city and the greater Dublin region, as it's called, so overdeveloped that we can't move from A to B. And your quality of life is so badly undermined, and access to services just becomes really, really tricky, whether it's school places or anything else. It's in all of our interest to actually join the dots on a small island. Let me repeat that. So I think there has been an issue, and I know that we refer to many things as the Cinderella of the system, but I think this area of regional development has got lip service. But maybe now, post-COVID, we can, in a very concerted way, agree that as the kind of overarching framework through which we filter policy and developments. And I know my own colleagues, I mentioned Moraid, I should mention Rose Conway Walsh, Claire Curran, Martin Kenny. We have our own internal working group within our own parliamentary structure. and it is all about regional development, balanced regional development, and how we achieve that. And I can tell you that if we get the chance, if we are given the chance to form or to be part of an administration, that certainly that sense of putting that on a formal footing, much as we talk about equality budgeting for disability, for gender, for these things, the regions, the geography of this needs to kick in as well.
Yeah, no, I'm delighted to hear that, because as we know, the lead-in time to begin making initial steps, it takes 2 to 3 years to have,
Yes.
some form of impactful change, and just there needs to be a progress shift there. Mary Lou, to swing to taxation, there's a couple of questions in on this, and I'll read one verbatim. It's very well framed. Where does Deputy McDonald stand on income tax, especially the punitive marginal rates of 48% and up for those earning incomes of 70 to 80,000, who often are those with families and children, and who pay the bulk of income tax but get little of the benefits of medical cards, university grants? You often hear they're earning that bit too much that they don't qualify for supports. Many have significant mortgage payments as well, particularly if they're living in urban centres. So you might just talk to that taxation policy.
Sure. So firstly, taxation has to be an instrument of economic and social development. It has to be focused at delivering quality public services and giving all of us, every single one of us, business people, students, workers, all of us, families, the best chance to live the best life that we can. In other words, taxation is not an instrument of vengeance or a punishment on citizens, or at least it absolutely should not be. So I want to say that first. I think we have historically a problem in that people at various stages, now this is before my time, but paid huge levels of income tax, and then looked and asked, so what am I getting for it? And I think that's at the core of our issue. So when you talk about what might be described as the squeezed middle, people who have their hand in their pocket paying for everything, and who don't get any sense of relief or return, that's what we need to fix. I mean, the idea that childcare still in this jurisdiction is the equivalent of having a second mortgage. We need to intervene, and we need to fix that. And in fact, we brought forward a very, very ambitious package over the last number of budgets, in which we proposed increased state funding into the childcare sector. But the quid pro quo and the return would be that those that availed of the state scheme, that the fees would drop. And I mean, equally in terms of access to healthcare and education, you see, for everyone in the squeeze middle, I think for those citizens, more perhaps than anyone else, the question looms large. What kind of system do we want to live in? Do we want to live in a society that has progressive taxation, where you pay your taxes, you're happy to pay your taxes, but your legitimate expectation for good services and supports is returned? And if we want that, well, then we need to deliver that. I think there is an argument clearly that the marginal rate kicks in at a very low rate. I think that's a fair thing to say. But I think that our best way to support that cohort of workers and families, Kenny, is to make direct interventions in childcare, in housing, in education, because those are the extras. Those it matters little actually what you're earning or what income tax you're paying if the idea of an affordable house is 450 or 500,000 euro. Do you know what I mean? So it's a question of how you come at these things, and for us, I suppose our fundamental philosophy is those with wider shoulders, deeper pockets, pay a bit extra, but you also have a legitimate expectation that you're getting return on your tax euros. I think that is only fair.
I think that's the important point to strike, is many are paying at the moment, but there's a frustration with services that are in offer. So again, it comes back to that delivery and the expediting of delivery. But very good. You mentioned housing, and I'll come back to taxation in a moment in terms of corporate rate. But in terms of housing, this is a significant frustration. Many of the companies that have invested and come to Galway, they love so much about the city, the region, the capacity for being brilliant and attracting talent here. But one of the questions and topics that are getting a fair bit of attention at the moment is that availability of affordable quality housing that is in the urban centre, because we don't want adding more and more to the commuter scenario. And unfortunately, people are following price because demand is more limited. People are moving out, which of course is adding to congestion. What would you do, or what's, let's say, if in leadership in government in the morning, to try and accelerate the delivery of housing, urban centres, where maybe we have certain owners who are sitting on vacant commercial properties, or indeed sitting on land that could be developed? How do we accelerate this from your perspective? And if you were in power, what will be the initial steps?
Well, I think we need to do a number of things, but at the core of it, we need to accept that if you keep doing things, repeating the same old mistakes, you're going to land on the same results and have the same problems. The housing crisis is no news to anybody. This has been a reality now for many years, and we moved through cycles of like negative equity and house repossessions, and it's kind of it has transformed itself. It's had different iterations, but we have had a problem with accommodation, secure accommodation now for years. So this is no news to anybody. The need to swiftly build affordable social housing on the one hand, but also affordable housing and affordable rental is an agreed objective right across political life. So the question then comes to, well, how do you actually do it? So just to say a number of things. Firstly, we have to up the ante in terms of the state's ambition. And, you know, I'm not going to do this here because you'll hear politicians kind of almost like in a bidding war of numbers. And I don't think that gets anybody who I know who needs a home. They need one home. They don't want to hear about hundreds of thousands. But let me just say that we have to build at scale. And that means that in some ways the system has to let people in. So, I mean, there is a development in Santry in Dublin by Coolan developers, and it's quoted and cited time and again because they managed to build very efficiently, very good quality and very affordable housing in Dublin. I've spoken to other housing agencies who similarly have built projects, and all of them consistently have told me, we can do this and we can do this to scale. And then I ask them, well, why aren't you doing it? And why aren't you doing it to scale? And you find that they are caught up in almost like a Bermuda triangle of bureaucracy and red tape and so on. That needs to be unscrambled. And we need to let people in to build for the houses built. We've a lot of public land. It's zoned. A lot of it is serviced. It's good to go. We need to build public housing. And by that, I mean social housing, but I also mean affordable housing and affordable rental on public land, where the state is in possession of the land and where the state in an emergency situation can advance things very quickly. We need to clean up procurement, as I mentioned earlier on. Owen has told me consistently that if and when we are in government, that's one of the areas that we need to go to quickly, just to finesse the procurement. And we need to have a healthy and appropriate relationship with private development, because there's room for that too. Sometimes we're accused of, the Taoiseach does it from time to time, says, you don't like builders, or you don't. Well, I actually do like builders. Builders built my house. In fact, they build everyone's house. And of course, there's room for private development in the market. Of course, that's the case. But you cannot have a situation where private funds, these big investment funds, are literally gobbling up, particularly the apartment stock as it comes to market. That is already very damaging in the city that I live in, and it'll be equally bad news anywhere else. And then, of course, you mentioned the vacant site tax and the need where there are vacant or derelict properties across the state. I don't think we have been nearly kind of assertive enough in bringing those back into play. So we need to look at any and all mechanisms at a central government level, but also at a local authority level, because in terms of derelict buildings, actually the local authorities have quite considerable scope in that type of scenario. Co-living is not an answer. It just isn't. And to persist with approaches like that will cause us a problem. And Kenny, when you raise the issue, very often we've discussed the issue of housing in the first instance, you know, from a social perspective and for our families and our communities. But this is an economic, you know, real jeopardy to us. Now, I know from talking to business leaders across the island, but also internationally, the future for business and for investment is, yes, where do you have the skilled workforce? What does your tax regime? What's your, you know, your R&D regime looking like? But it will also be, where do people want to live? Where do people want to put down roots? Where is there a good quality of life? And I mean, I cannot think of a better place than the west of Ireland, you know, from a quality of life point of view, and a place where investment will come and investment will stay, because not alone do you have all of the above in terms of skills and the tax regime, but also critically, it is a quality place to live. So we have to get this right. And I'm really sorry to report, and I say this with sadness and a great deal of frustration, that we are watching again in slow motion this government make so many of the mistakes that the last one made.
So just conscious of time, what you're saying on this and the Bermuda Triangle analogy that you use, if you were in government, a lot will be done through public expenditure and reform, or whatever channel, to expedite and transform some of the delivery in for example, housing in other areas.
That's exactly what I'm saying, Kenny. I don't think even with the best housing policy in the world, the best will in the world, you know, the most, and I believe that we have the best person who could deliver on this in Owen O'Brien. He's my colleague, but that also happens to be my objective assessment. But if you don't have the delivery mechanisms right, and yes, that means deeper, and it means the Department of Finance, you have to line all of that up to ensure that you can do this right, and also that you can put pace. We have to put pace into this as well.
Okay, agreed on that. Mary Lou, corporation tax, and we are up on quarter to, so I would be shocked though if I let you off the line without asking this question. Many of our FDI companies come here because we've talent. There's a quality place to work for their employees. There's our third level institutions do a fantastic job of bringing more and more students into the workforce, all of that. But also corporation tax is a piece in the puzzle that certainly is a helpful discussion point. If you were in charge in the morning, what is your position on corporation tax at the moment, or what reform would you see there?
Well, our position is that we support the 12.5% rate. That's been our position for a very long time. And as a matter of fact, we were engaged in trying to get that as the applicable rate right across the island. We got the devolution of tax powers from London to Belfast, Kenny, as you know. That hasn't happened, but there you go. I am conscious, though, that there have been and that there will be change at the level of the OECD. So this is now in play. For us, let me just say two things. That number one, it is for Ireland to decide our corporate tax rate. I think we need to be, and I'm as good a European as the next, and I see the value in many areas of life working together and so on. But the essence of a democratic system is that you have decisions as to how you raise taxes and how you spend them. And we have always been really clear domestically and at a European level that we're not giving way to anybody, however meretricious they might regard their arguments on that. We decide our corporate tax rate. And I think we are just going to have to diplomatically and politically be very alert and be smart about how we navigate all of this internationally. I think we have the advantage that it's not really a matter of now contention across political life on the 12.5%. But I'd also say this, Kenny, that because change is coming, we shouldn't make the mistake either of thinking that it's the corporate tax rate, it's 12.5% or bust and we're finished. It's not quite that clear cut. And I agree with you on the rate, and we want to maintain that position. But I wouldn't underestimate for a second either the issue of talent and skill and innovation. And we're now living in a post-Brexit scenario, and we're on the inside, and our next door neighbours, and unfortunately part of the island for now at least, is on the outside. But that's a game changer. That changes the political environment, it changes the business environment. We need to make sure that the change that accrues is for a positive. But that's our position on the corporate tax rate. Joe Biden will pursue an agenda, I should say President Biden will pursue an agenda that is favourable to the states. What, of course, that's each system and each country will defend their interests as they see them. And we need to be just very much on our game and alert to the bottom lines for Ireland.
Lovely. I'm going to hand back to JP Gilmartin in a moment, but just one loaded question, but a very quick one that has come in. Does Sinn Féin support the amalgamation of Galway City and Galway County Council?
Oh, no. Listen, that would be like going into Newry and trying to pick a side between Down and Armagh. I'm far too smart for that. Far too clever for that. I have to say to you, I'm sorry this is by Zoom because I absolutely love the west of Ireland. I was telling you, Kenny, we took our holidays now, not in Galway, in Mayo last year, and we're returning back this summer. My kids can't wait. So it's an incredible part of our country and the most evocative of all regions. That takes a lot for a dog to conceive that, you know, but the most evocative of Irish regions, and such a pull for tourism, for the profile of Ireland. So much of that is owed to the West. So we are all in your debt to that, but I am not going to mediate that particular dispute.
Lovely. Listen, it has been an absolute pleasure. The conversation has gone on for hours, but I'm going to hand you back to our President, JP, and thank you, Mary Lou.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kenny, and thank you, Deputy McDonald. Look, an awful lot of ground has been covered in the last 45 minutes, but for me, I think it was heartening to hear that there is a lot of alignment between the policies of Sinn Féin and those of Galway Chamber across some key areas. Like, we too support the unleashing, as you called it, Mary Lou, of the potential of the regional cities and towns. And the need to create an economic environment where, you know, through a targeted enterprise strategy, we can support and scale businesses in the region. So this commitment by Sinn Féin to the delivery of balanced regional development, that's very much welcomed by us. We too in Galway Chamber believe that delivery on transport infrastructure and greater connectivity is central to achieving that regional balanced development. We welcome your support for the Galway transportation strategy and the full delivery of that, which of course is not just the Galway City Ring Road, but it's also the other enabling measures like bus connects, cycling infrastructure and pedestrian infrastructure too, because all of these need to be delivered together for that strategy to work. The development of Galway Harbour, as you said, it's a key project for the Port of Galway to support its current and future customers, which will likely be serving the offshore renewable energy potential off the west coast of Ireland. And it'll also help to unlock a new urban and living quarter in the city centre. So we're welcome and grateful for your support of that. And finally, I suppose we in Galway Chamber have a Living in Galway committee, which recognises the need for greater access to affordable housing in locations where people want to live, and adjacent to proper functioning public transport infrastructure. And that's important, not just from an economic perspective, but from a societal perspective. So I think there are a number of the strands that I took out of this conversation today where I think we have a lot of alignment. So all that's left for me to do at this stage is to once again thank you very much for your time. We look forward to welcoming you back in person, hopefully before not too long. And thank you very much for your time again this afternoon.
Pleasure is mine. Slán live.
Slán.